Welcome to another session of Informally Formal. Our today's topic is about youth development and empowerment, a very important topic indeed. And we have with us to talk about this very important subject, Hossain Khaled, who is a four-time president of Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the youngest ever to be elected to that prestigious institution. So welcome, Hossain Khaled.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much for having me.
Let me first start with ask you to paint a picture for us. As we know that Bangladesh enjoys a tremendous demographic dividend in the sense that we are a young nation with 65% of the population being under 35. And
Absolutely.
we have a tremendous youth population, but this demographic dividend that could work in our favor is not going to stay there forever. It's going to disappear after so many years. So please, over to you, Khaled. Tell us what do we need to do in order to make sure that we in Bangladesh get to utilize this demographic dividend. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Akber. I wish I had the answers to be to such a big question that you had, but I'll share 2 cents of my knowledge that I foresee are extremely important. As you have rightly said, 65% of the total population is below 35 years, and empowering them, creating jobs for them, giving them the right skills, bringing them at par with the current state of affairs is extremely important. And one thing I've realized, especially over the course of my not only formal education but also self-education, is that we need to educate ourselves outside of the academia a lot more. Things like physiology, things like psychology is really not being taught in the academia. And more so today, we feel and we realize how important it is today. It completely changes an individual's mindset, their approach to life, their approach to challenges, their approach to being creative completely changes when your mindset changes.
Right, right. Khaled, you bring about a very important point that I've often talked about is in Bangladesh, not everyone needs to become an engineer, a doctor, or have a BBA or an MBA, right? So there used to be a time when we used to think, okay, we need to produce. Of course, there is the importance. There is definitely an importance attached to having so-called STEM graduates, science, technology, engineering, and math. But at the same time, in Bangladesh, with the population size that we have, and the number of people entering the marketplace, we don't need everyone to be in those areas. We need a lot of technical skills. Wouldn't you agree, Khaled?
Absolutely. And that's what I had earlier referred to, was giving them the right skills that's required today, preparing them for the future, preparing them for tomorrow. If I may give my own example, and I think since we are talking to the youth, I was brainwashed as a child that I have to get an accounting degree because my dad thought that each of his sons having different skill set would add value to the company. And obviously, I'm like, since that was already, in my mind, I went and got my undergraduate done in accounting. But then when I started practicing accounting, I realized it was so boring for me and there was nothing creative for me to contribute. And unfortunately, by the time I had actually done my first finance class during my undergrad, it was not till like the final year. Unfortunately, because most of my friends who were Americans, were always afraid of math, and I always enjoyed math. So I just tagged along with them. And by the time I realized, hey, finance is what I should have pursued my career with, or at least my education with. So that's when I actually went on to do my master's in finance, in particular in international banking. So that's what I thought, or I realized at a much later time what my skill sets were. So it's never late. It's never, there's never really a right time to find your own skill set. Your skill sets can change, your interests can change, but educate yourself, self-educate yourself to be at par so that you can actually own the present and going forward.
In the Western world, at least the avenues are so much more wider and open. Choices are available to where a child, a young adult, could pursue any number of areas that he or she may want to pursue. Which, unfortunately, in a country like Bangladesh, there is a certain mindset. At one point in the 70s, I believe it was pharmacy. Everyone started going into pharmacy. And then there was engineering and medicine.
Absolutely.
And now it happens to be BBAs and MBAs. Khaled, let me ask you, to the educational institutions, we have talked about in our forum, we have talked about this subject also, is where we need to find a mechanism whereby there is establishing a connection between the academia and the business world, whereby the academic institutions are producing graduates that are in need by the employers in Bangladesh. Do you face that challenge as well, Khaled?
Mr. Akbar, this has been a challenge, I think, not only in Bangladesh. I think it still persists even in developed worlds. Unfortunately, we are still tied to that social stigma of having degrees, that if you have degrees, you're educated, whereas your own knowledge set is not really considered as education. You know, like you have already mentioned, and you have rightly said that you need to have passion towards something to actually be successful. I'm like, you can be successful in many different ways, but fulfillment will not come until and unless there's passion behind your work, behind what you do. Of course, this is again my opinion, and these are my 2 cents. Not everyone has to agree with it. It has to start from a parent's mindset also on how we groom our children. Parents also, from a very young age, need to interact with kids a lot more closely, observing what their potentials and what their interests are, and grooming them accordingly.
Right.
Giving them that right seeds to grow into their right potentials.
Right.
Whether somebody wants to be a race car driver, whether somebody wants to be a cliffhanger, or whether somebody wants to be an engineer will come automatically. Right. That's what I feel.
Right. Khaled, that brings me to something that I've often talked about, which is even for a small insignificant job, you need this training, that training, and if or a college degree for that matter. But interestingly enough, the most important job in the world, called parenting, there is no education, there is no training. One thing, if I hear you correctly, is what we are talking about is we need to allow for passion to blossom, so people are more engaged in what they do in their lives. The other one is, I think you mentioned, is that we were discussing that not everyone needs to have a college degree per se. We need to have, in Bangladesh, we need to have a lot of world-class vocational training. So it serves two purposes. One is it caters to the local economy where that is needed. A certified welder, for example, a good plumber, It also, Khaled, serves another purpose. In our country that exports a lot of manpower to the world, and which, as you know, we only send primarily unskilled workers abroad. So if we could have these workers properly certified and trained, then we could double, if not triple and quadruple our remittance back home. So reflect on those things just very quickly. You had mentioned, but is that pretty much in line with what you're thinking?
Oh, absolutely. But just to backtrack a bit, one thing I would rather supplement, or I would rather like to see, is that vocational education becoming part of the core curricula, even in colleges and universities. Having that hands-on experience. College degrees are not a bad thing. I particularly am in favor of college education. University education, postgraduate education. Education also matures an individual. It gives you a lot more perspective. But education, unfortunately, at this present moment, like you have already mentioned, is missing that interlink with the real world. And vocational training is just part of it. Now, coming back to our present situation with overseas workers, there's so many examples that can be given. And I think if you or our audience have an opportunity to actually go into Dhaka Chamber of Commerce's report and studies on this particular subject, you will see how vast and how important this particular subject is for our economy. Every person in Dubai or in the Middle East, you would see, are either from, especially in retail stores, are from Philippines. Why? In particular, because they have that language efficiency. And then they are also very hospitable. They know from the very beginning, culturally, how to be hospitable. And unfortunately, we have not really groomed our arts, our music. These things need to be groomed as individuals into our culture.
Study after study has shown that 80 to 85% of your success in life comes not from the hard skills that you learn in schools and colleges. I don't know if you're aware of some of the studies that have taken place. The first study was done in an institution called Man Engineering over 100 years ago. Now, most recently in 2008, they conducted one such study of skill sets in Google, which they thought it's a technology-driven company. So obviously technology would rank towards the top. But interestingly enough, guess what? Out of the 8 items that were being measured, technology ranked last. So that is one of the things that we ought to, in empowering our young generation, we need to make them understand that there is a difference between schooling and education. Education is a lifelong thing. To my astonishment, we find educational institutions, particularly in Bangladesh, that still think that technical education trumps. That technical education is everything. It is important, don't get me wrong. That is what gets you in the door, gets you started and what have you. But when you measure success, ultimately, it ranks last.
Akbar, if I can just actually supplement, I cannot argue with the debate that you've put on. I fully agree with you on that. And but just to give you an example, and I think some of our youth whose audience, if I may say, I'm like, from a very simple business perspective, if I may say, when we onboard fresh graduates, we have to spend or invest at least a good period of 6 months bringing them at par with the jobs that they will be handling, whether it's sales, whether it's accounting, accounting is more technical. You do your journal entries, what's it's basically math. But when it comes to human interaction, it changes everything. Every moment can be different. So your mindset, your psychological development is extremely important. So for you to actually educate someone on the job is important, but at the same time, this is an investment of almost 6 months for every company.
Khalid, if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is we need a lot of interaction between that. We have also, I also fully believe, a lot of interaction between the marketplace, which is the employers, and the academia, the academic
Absolutely.
institutions. And also, if I hear you correctly, there needs to be a lot more training, practical side of education that needs to be incorporated. That can be done through internships, okay? A lot more internships. So that again would require businesses and educational institutions to work in tandem. So when
Mr. Akbar, if I may supplement, just add a little to your comment. If you notice this mushroom of institutes, business institutes, or education centers in Dhaka or Bangladesh, in particular Dhaka Chamber, we have the Dhaka Chamber Business Institute itself, and they do short courses. Why did we even have to do this to begin with?
So, Khaled, how time flies when we're talking about important and interesting things like youth development and empowerment. So we're at almost at the tail end. So very quickly here, what would be some of your guidelines or suggestions?
Pursue your passion. Find your passion. Regardless of what people say, love what you do and make sure you make money out of it. If it's just a passion, if it's something that you just love to do, and if you do not make it into a career, you will not make money out of it. You got to love what you do and make money out of it. Conversion into profits is what will make you happy. That very little progress on a daily basis is what's going to make you happy. And that's just the very moral or very natural habit of a human being. We want to see progress. And most importantly, there is no end to learning. You have to, and we have to spend time on self-development, on self-education. I am still doing it. I am still trying to learn. I am still trying to grow. And there's no end to it till you go to the grave. If you have the right, open, receptive mindset, it's not only books that you will learn from. It's not only training sessions that you will learn from. You will learn from people, whether it's that child, whether it's a younger individual, whether it's an older individual. You have to be receptive to learn. You have to absorb what's best for you. There's too many things out there. Just pick and choose what's best for you.
Right, but to that, Khaled, the unemployed youth in our country, the unemployed youth would say to that, they would say that I would be happy to do that, but beggars cannot be choosers. So what would you then suggest to the unemployed youth population out there that have worked really hard, let's say, to get an education, but they find themselves unemployed? What should they do?
$1 million question. From business perspective, of course, we are all trying to create jobs. But at the same time, youths have a lot more potentials in you, a lot more creativity in you than we do. Think of yourselves in a very humble manner, what you can do for others. Think of simple solutions to bigger problems. And that's what we have been taught from our father, who have always looked at the world and tried to find simple solutions, simple products that people need on a daily basis.
To the youth out there, the message that we would like to send that first and foremost, to have the right attitude, to look at life from not what life can give you, rather what you can give to life. What can you create? And side by side, equally important is the hard work that you bring into it. Unfortunately,
Absolutely. Nobody's going to hand it to you. You have to
absolutely,
earn it.
absolutely. So to have the passion, have the right attitude, and be willing to put in that extra work, to put in that hard work. There is unfortunately no substitute for that. And most of our youth, we find, too engaged in, let's say, social media these days. They'd spend hours
It's
upon hours.
distraction.
Yeah,
It distracts us.
yeah,
You
absolutely.
can't really blame them. That's how it's been designed. If I may just interject, Mr. Akbar, uh, let's put it this way: if social media is something that I'm addicted to, I should ensure that I benefit out of it.
Right,
I need to look at the perspective should be that I want to make money out of social media. I need to make an earning and a living and something that I enjoy. If this is something that I love, then that's what it should be.
absolutely. Once again, Khaled, we are almost at the tail end. So I guess just to wrap it up, we would want to leave our audience with these thoughts that, first and foremost, as you mentioned, that you need to have a passion. If you're not passionate about something, that you will end up doing things that you do not enjoy, and as such, you will not excel. So you need to bring passion to your life, pursue something that you love, if I hear you right, Khaled. And then obviously you need to have the right attitude towards life, because without attitude, like they say, attitude determines your altitude. So if you don't bring the right attitude to life, rest is meaningless. So with those few words, I guess, again, thank you so very much, Khaled. I would like to keep my invitation open to you, because you're a fun person to engage in discussions with. I would love to bring you back several more times. I'd like to thank our audience for joining us for this great discussion, and I would hope for you to stay safe and join us again next week for another interesting session. With that, I sign off. Goodbye.